Okay, I need to tell you about the most dramatic business trip in human history, and about the pettiest man of the Middle Ages, a bishop named Liutprand. Because today we're counting down his 5 worst L's, ranked straight from his own official government report, okay? So, the year is 949, and our man, a young diplomat from Italy, walks into the throne room of Constantinople. And the throne levitates while he is watching. There are golden lions roaring at his feet, and tiny mechanical birds singing in a golden tree, and the emperor is just rising toward the ceiling, like that is a completely normal thing for an emperor to do. And this man goes home to Italy and writes what I can only describe as the 5-star review of all time, and honestly, deserved. And then 19 years later, the same man comes back, and this time, they leave him standing outside the gate, in the rain, like a person who doesn't even have a reservation, until the 11th hour of the day. And I know it was the 11th hour because he put the hour in the report. Of course he put the hour in the report. He counted. He always counted. And that is the report we're counting down today. The pettiest official document that survived the Middle Ages. And I've read it so many times at this point that it's honestly a personality trait. Let's go. Okay, 30 seconds of background. Stay with me because it all pays off. So his boss Otto has just crowned himself Roman emperor in the West, which is awkward because there's already a Roman emperor in the East, and the East is foaming. And also, minor detail, Otto is currently invading their half of Italy. So the mission, and I need you to hear the whole mission in one sentence, is to walk into the capital of the empire your boss is actively invading and ask its emperor for his daughter as a bride for your boss's son. Which, respectfully, is a Delulu mission. And the man they send is our guy. By now, the Bishop of Cremona and the single most gifted hater of the 10th century. And he survives his 120 days there on pure spite. L number 5, the accommodation. So they put the embassy in a marble palace, which sounds like an upgrade until you actually live there because it keeps out neither the cold nor the heat. There's no drinkable water in the entire building, and it sits so far from the palace that the walk over, and it's a walk because the guards won't let him ride a horse, leaves the whole delegation gasping. So basically, it's an open concept luxury loft with the climate of a bus stop and the guest policy of a supermax. And it comes staffed because there's a warden, and I need you to sit down for what our bishop, a man professionally required to believe the best about everyone, wrote about this warden in an official report to 2 emperors. Quote, "If you were to seek another like him, you would not find him on earth. You might, perhaps, in hell." End quote. I know. And that's week 1, and he's got 116 days left with the manager of Hell's front desk. Also, and I think about this constantly, at one point, he goes 3 weeks without speaking to a single soul outside his own staff. And in the file, where a normal person would write, "I was lonely," this man lists his fellow residents as 5 lions. 5 lions. There's no explanation before the line, and no explanation after the line. And scholars have been staring at it for 1,000 years going, "What lions, sir?" And here's the actually scary part. The housing was the part they handled well, so wait until somebody feeds him. L number 4. The catering and the wine, he reports, is undrinkable because they cut it with pitch, pine resin, and plaster. And look, I hear you. Maybe that's just an Italian man meeting Greek wine for the first time and calling the police, which it genuinely might be. Except he also separately reports being served straight brine, so the plaster stays on the board. And then the food shows up drowning in oil and fermented fish sauce. And then, after a protocol disaster we're getting to in a second, and which I'm still not over, the Emperor of the Romans, the most powerful man alive, personally sends this sick, humiliated bishop a whole young goat stuffed with garlic, onion, and leeks, swimming in more fish sauce, a garlic bomb as a power move, and our guy, God bless him, thanks him for it in writing, so sarcastically that the sarcasm is now a primary source. Scholars cite the sarcasm. And then there are the entries nobody laughs at. During a famine, his allowance stops for 9 days. He writes that 3 gold pieces couldn't buy 1 dinner for his 25 attendants and 4 guards. And when his friends send bread and wine and fruit, the guards pour the food on the ground and beat the men who carried it. Hold that entry. It changes how number 1 reads. L number 3, the seating chart. So at the first state dinner, they seat him 15th from the emperor, with no cloth of honor at his place, while his staff doesn't even get into the building. And we know the exact seat number because, say it with me, he counted. And 3 weeks later, this court tops itself in the most bureaucratic way imaginable, because the envoy from Bulgaria gets seated above him. And when he objects, they don't even argue with him, they just produce a written sworn agreement that says the Bulgarian outranks him. And they cite him the clause, to his faith, and listen, the emperor outranking you is fine, that's the emperor. But getting mogged by the 14 names between you and the emperor, with notarized receipts, that's a different injury entirely. They seated me below the Bulgarian. Then they showed me the clause. So he storms out, obviously, and he gets sentenced to eat with the emperor's servants for it. And that same night is when the goat arrives, which means 2 of the most unhinged entries in this entire file happened over the course of one dinner. L number 2, the conversations, which somehow go worse than the seating, because on day 3 he gets into a fight with the emperor's brother over one single word. Because this court calls Otto a king and keeps emperor for their own guy, which in the 10th century is how you say per my last email. And then, on day 4, at Pentecost, in public at a religious festival, the emperor himself looks at the ambassador of the West and says, "You are not Romans, you are Lombards." And I need you to feel the wattage of that sentence, because in one line, it deletes everything Otto has ever claimed to be. And every single person in that room knew it. Now, his report says he fired back on the spot, with a whole speech about how Romulus was a fratricide and Rome was founded as an asylum for runaway slaves. So honestly, being called not Roman was a compliment. And did he actually say that out loud? To the emperor? Inside the palace? The file is his, so his comebacks are undefeated. And I'm choosing to believe him because it's funnier, but there was no winning in that room. Because the room came with an army. And somewhere in those 4 days, the actual mission, the daughter, the marriage, quietly dies on that table. So he takes the fight to the one arena where he's never lost. And this, right here, is the official description of the Roman emperor, filed in a state document addressed to 2 other emperors. Quote, "A monstrosity of a man, a dwarf, fat-headed, with tiny mole's eyes, a neck scarcely an inch long, pig-like bristles, in color an Ethiopian. You would not like to meet him in the dark." A bishop wrote that about an emperor on government letterhead, and the first time I read it, I had to close the book and take a lap. And the same report keeps pausing mid-grievance to remind us how shapely and radiant his own boss is, which historians politely call panegyric, and I call it glazing. And inside that building, the man is 0 for everything. And the file is how he fights back. And if you want to call that coping, be so serious. It's coping with citations. And the file saves its worst entry for checkout, because the last thing this empire does to him is go through his bags. L number 1, the purples. September 17th, the top of the file, the one he never got over. And 4 senior palace officials show up and order the embassy's baggage opened. Because the finest purple cloth in this empire is coleomina, forbidden, reserved for Romans alone. And the export rule is simple. Approved pieces get a little lead seal. Forbidden pieces get confiscated, price refunded, quote unquote, in theory. They open his bags, and they take the 5 costliest purple cloths this man owns. And I need a minute every time I read this part. And he crashes out like a lawyer, because listen to this protest. Quote, "Where is the emperor's word? Where is the imperial promise? I asked him up to what price he would allow me to buy vestments in honor of my church, and he replied, 'Buy any that you like, and as many as you like.'" Then he names 4 witnesses by name and adds, and this is my favorite sentence in the entire file, that he understood the emperor's Greek without an interpreter. And sir, you're being robbed by an empire, and your move is, "I speak your language and I have witnesses"? He's running a deposition in the middle of his own dismissal, and I would hire him today. And their answer might be the most Byzantine sentence ever recorded, that as the Romans surpass all nations in wealth and wisdom, so must they surpass them in dress, which decoded, and I'm barely translating here, means you can't wear this, you're not that guy. And when he snaps back that Venetian and Amalfitane traders haul this exact cloth west every single sailing season, they reply, calmly, imagine the calm, that those carriers will be searched from now on, and it will go very badly for anyone they catch. And then he stops arguing law. and he bargains. Take the ones I bought, leave the ones my friends gave me. Yeah, half that cloth was gifts from his friends, for his church, and the answer that comes back is ice water. Quote, he does not win people's friendship by offering them money. He subdues them to his sway by terror and the sword. We shall treat gifts and purchases in the same way. Every purple vestment you have acquired must be returned to us. End quote. They took the gifts, too. And that's why I told you to hold the famine entry, because it's the same signature, the poured out bread and the confiscated gifts. This empire never lost its temper with him. It hurt him by the book, and the book always balanced. Day 120, they finally let him go, with sealed letters, horses for the men, and not one horse for the baggage. And the trip home is its own file. A 49-day donkey crawl to the Greek coast, a storm that nearly kills the party, sailors who literally desert, Shan 20 days detained at Corfu, where officials search his baggage a second time for hidden purple. So this empire screened one middle-aged bishop for contraband color twice, on 2 separate coasts, and the color was the contraband. And then the file just stops mid-complaint, because the surviving manuscript physically breaks off while he's still complaining, which means the last thing the Middle Ages preserved of this document is an unfinished grievance. And I couldn't script a better last page. And believe me, I've tried. Now the epilogues, because this is where the universe starts taking his side. Because 15 months after that little speech about terror and the sword, Nikephoros gets murdered in his own bedchamber. And the chronicles say the killers came in through the empress's rooms, with her blessing. So the man who promised terror got exactly that, at home, from inside the marriage. And our correspondent never filed that story, which is a genuine tragedy, because he would have paid gold for the assignment. And the purple-born princess never comes. But 4 years later, a different emperor sends a different girl for Otto's son, Theophanu. And she becomes one of the great empresses of the Middle Ages. So the one thing this entire catastrophic trip failed to deliver basically arrived in the mail, under new management. And Liutprand himself is dead within a few years, by some accounts on yet another diplomatic mission east, which would mean, and I say this with immense love, that this man literally died commuting. Constantinople's walls came down 5 centuries later. The empire that took his silks is gone. The seating chart, I want to be very clear, is extremely gone. And the complaint file is still in print, which means 1,000 years of emperors got outlived by one man's grudge. And I'll be honest with you, I opened this file to count one petty man's L's, and I'm closing it genuinely obsessed with him. Because everything you now know, the throne, the plaster, the goat, the claws, the 5 purples, you know because the most humiliated man in Constantinople wrote it all down while it was happening to him. And he counted every insult, and history kept the receipts, and I checked the math twice. It's a dub. It was always a dub. Somebody in that palace kept our man's 5 purples. The file stays open. Who's your suspect?